On a normal Friday morning in June of 2021, Andrew Devers made an impulsive, life-changing decision. The native Nebraskan turned Washington State resident decided to go for a hike, and so he grabbed his backpack, a water bottle, and a can of SpaghettiOs, and he drove himself to a trailhead that he had never been to before. His hike started normally, but within a few hours, a terrifying realization had sunk in. Andrew had no idea where he was, where the trail was, or how the hell to get back to the safety of his car. What had started as just a short little hike, something to do, had quickly turned into a life or death situation. Night 1 turned into night 2, and night 2 turned into night 3. He could hear voices traveling down the river, but nobody could hear him yelling back. He ate wild berries in a desperate attempt to stay energized, and he also drank from wild streams and rivers, despite the fact that he had no way of filtering the water. A record-breaking heat wave swept through the area, adding heat stroke and dehydration to the list of potential dangers. Eventually, Andrew was even violently swept off his feet by the strong current of the river, and he nearly drowned right then and there. He knew his chances of surviving were getting smaller and smaller with each passing day. Eventually, Andrew came to the realization that he was gonna die, and his only objective after this was to make it easier for the rescue workers to recover his body. This is the terrifying ordeal of Andrew Devers. Folks, this story is a literal nightmare. It's scary. It's in some ways actually quite inspiring, and there are a ton of lessons that we can take away from it. I'll be mentioning these lessons throughout the video, and it's actually for that reason that I'd like to thank Drink Element for making it possible to bring you them in the first place. That's right, this video is sponsored by Drink Element. They are the best electrolyte drink mix company in the entire world. It's not even close. The other day, I was actually out on a trail run, and I almost always bring Element with me unless it's really short. But this time I forgot, and I got just about halfway through my run. I was doing about 9 miles, and dude, I was dogging it. I was sweating a ton. It was really hot outside. I'm here in Hawaii. And so, dude, I needed these electrolytes and I did not have them. And it was just a great reminder of how amazing Drink Element is. Because when you sweat a lot, you need to replace your electrolytes. When you don't, you're going to end up feeling like I did. My muscles were cramping. I was extremely fatigued. It's just not good. So you got to replace those electrolytes, and Drink Element is the way to do it. Element has no sugar, no BS. All it has is a great taste and the electrolytes that you need, and they really do have a great taste. I mean, their flavors are so good. Grapefruit salt and citrus salt are two of my favorites, but they have a lot of other amazing flavors as well, and you can actually try all of them by doing this. Go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Make a purchase of whatever flavor sounds the best to you, and when you do that through my link, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional flavors thrown in with your order for no extra cost, so you're gonna get to try them all. One more time, drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. I also have a link to it in the description. Go click that link, check them out, and when you do, by the way, you'll also be doing this channel a massive favor. So with that said, let's get into the story. On June 18th, 2021, 25-year-old Andrew Devers decided he needed some fresh air. It was the summer after all. The sun was shining, and Andrew now lived in Washington State, which is a state that's known for its natural beauty and outdoor recreation opportunities. Why not go for a hike? He thought. What could possibly go wrong? Andrew wasn't a total beginner, but he definitely wasn't an expert hiker either. He had been going out for short day hikes a few times a summer for the past number of years, and he did feel comfortable hiking on his own. For this particular hike, Andrew chose the Pratt River Trail, which is a trail that he had never been on before. He grabbed his backpack and he loaded it up with a bottle of water and a can of SpaghettiOs, and then he drove out to the Middle Fork Campground in North Bend, Washington. It was here that his adventure began. Well, actually, taking one quick step back, before Andrew hiked out, he actually realized that he had left some cans of Mountain Dew in his trunk. He knew that this was definitely not the optimal hiking drink, but it was there. and so he threw a few cans of it in his backpack as well. As Andrew began hiking, he quickly realized that the Pratt River Trail was different than any trail he had been on before. He was used to hiking on wide, well-graded trails that receive a lot of foot traffic, but this trail, however, did not receive much use at the time. It was very narrow, it was overgrown, and it was difficult to follow in a lot of spots. Now, I will say that once you've got a decent amount of hiking experience, you do tend to get pretty good at following not so obvious trails like this. But for an overconfident beginner like Andrew, solo hiking an overgrown, seldom used trail is a recipe for disaster. Andrew continued down the Pratt River Trail, and despite its difficulty, he actually quite enjoyed the first part of his hike. Eventually, the trail opened up in an area that had been devastated previously by a landfall. Downed trees and branches were everywhere, and it made the already confusing trail even more confusing for Andrew. He hiked a bit further, but soon decided that the conditions were too difficult and that he didn't want to finish the trail. And so he turned around and he retraced his steps down back to the scene of the landslide, and it's here that he made an understandable but also very dangerous mistake. Following his intuition, Andrew Devers continued down what he believed was the trail. And rather than proceeding slowly, double checking his surroundings to make sure that he was going the right way, Andrew kind of just zoned out and got lost in his own head. Now, this is totally normal to do while hiking. I've done it countless times, especially if you have ADHD like Andrew does. But unfortunately, after just zoning out down the trail for around 45 minutes, Andrew would come to deeply regret his lack of awareness. If you didn't guess it by now, Andrew had taken a wrong turn. And while he was kind of just lost in his thoughts walking down what he thought was the trail, he was actually wandering further and further into the wilderness, away from any established marked routes. By the time he realized he had taken a wrong turn, there was no longer any visible path for him to follow. Andrew began looking for any sign of where to go, but a few hours passed and he still couldn't find his way back to the trail. Now, this is the moment where I feel like most people would probably start panicking. I mean, you're lost, you're all alone in the wilderness with no overnight gear. I mean, that's a pretty scary situation. Andrew, however, didn't panic. He remained hopeful that he would hear somebody eventually, and since the weather was still nice, he thought his chances were pretty good. There's actually a few important lessons that I want to highlight real quick here. The first one is that if Andrew had been using a GPS or even just a paper map potentially and a compass, he would have likely been able to stay on the correct trail, or at the very least, he could have used these tools to navigate himself out to safety. And the next lesson I want to highlight here is that whenever you're unsure of which way a trail goes, you have to proceed with caution. Don't just choose a path and follow it blindly. I mean, you got to take your best guess, but then you should move slowly and continuously reassess if you've chosen correctly. I really don't mean to criticize Andrew here. I really just think that those are important lessons to know. And with that, I also want to highlight something that Andrew did absolutely right in this situation, which was to not panic. This is obviously much easier said than done, but by remaining calm, Andrew definitely gave himself the best chance of survival. And not only did he stay calm, but he was actually pretty damn optimistic, even when it became obvious that he would be spending the night in the wilderness. He genuinely believed that he would find his way out in the morning, and so he settled in. He used his backpack to cover his feet, he pulled down his shirt to cover his torso, and he ended up using his long hair as a pillow. He made it through the night, and by the next morning, Andrew was still feeling pretty confident. It was now Saturday, a weekend, and so surely it would have been a busy day on the trail. He figured that all he had to do was just wait it out until you hear some other hikers, and then at that point he would be able to make his way out of the woods, no worse for wear. I respect the hell out of Andrew's confidence and optimism in this situation, but unfortunately it wouldn't last, and it would actually go in the complete opposite direction. Andrew did in fact end up hearing the voices of other hikers, but when he called out asking for help, he got no response. It's likely that the conversations he was hearing were actually carried upstream from long distances away, and so they sounded much closer than they actually were. This is the point when Andrew's attitude started to change. He didn't realize how far away the conversations were, and he became livid that nobody was responding to his shouts for help. Eventually, Andrew realized that nobody was coming to help him, and unfortunately, he was right. At this point, he had not even been reported missing yet, and so he began moving down the mountain in an attempt to reach the river. Flying helicopters from above would have had no view of the hikers below, and so going to a spot where they would easily be able to see him seemed like an obvious, potentially life-saving move. He was still incredibly angry at his situation, and as a result, he wasn't being very careful as he charged through the brush. Andrew ended up tripping and was shanked by a sharp stick right underneath his kneecap. Whew. Around this same time, he also realized that his water bottle had fallen out of his backpack, and so he now had no way to carry water around with him. I mean, clearly his situation was going from bad to worse. He was now bleeding with no medical supplies to treat himself, and he was at a high risk of dehydration. And folks, in case you lost track of the timeline here, at this point, Andrew had only been lost for a little over 24 hours. This is also about the point where Andrew was reported missing. His then girlfriend, Christina, had been worried when he didn't return from his hike, but for the first number of hours, she kept justifying to herself why he hadn't returned. She thought maybe he had made some friends on the hike or something like that, but eventually reality set in and she did in fact report him missing. I do want to note that she reported Andrew missing much faster than happens in most of the stories I cover on this channel. Another night went by, and on day 3 of his ordeal, hunger was really starting to get to Andrew. He needed to find something to eat, and he needed to do it fast. While searching, he noticed some trees falling down on the other side of the river that he was following. It looked like somebody over there was cutting down trees. And so with his hunger and fatigue growing, Andrew saw this as his ticket to safety. And so he decided to make his way across the fast-moving river to try and go contact these people. He began wandering along the river banks looking for a safe spot to cross, and eventually he found a cluster of rocks that he could use to hop across the water. And it goes without saying, that's much easier said than done. I've rock hopped across many rivers over the years. I know many of you watching have as well, and these rocks are wet, they're slippery, and they're also loose. And so one misstep or one moment of hesitation even could send you plummeting into the current. And as you probably guessed by now, that's exactly what happened to Andrew. He almost made it too. That's the crazy part. He had 6 rocks to hop across, and he was still going strong after rock number 5. The 6th rock got him though, unfortunately. It moved out of place when he stepped on it, and it sent him right into the water where he was pushed downstream. So he's just being sent down the river at this point. His only hope was to grab something on the side of the river in order to pull himself out, which he did when a stray branch came into view. But of course, this branch snapped when he grabbed onto it. He was still determined to save himself, however, and so Andrew tried again. He grabbed onto another branch, and this time, miraculously, it worked, and he very quickly found himself standing up on the side of the river. Crisis had been averted, at least for the moment, and actually, another miracle was about to take place as well. As Andrew was collecting himself after nearly drowning, he felt a calling from his then girlfriend, Christina. Here, he could have sworn, is what she said, telling him to look to his right. When he did this, he discovered a trail of berries that led him to a soft, mossy spot that would have been pretty nice to sleep in. He now had a little bit of food, a somewhat comfortable spot to rest, and earlier in the day, he had actually discovered an abandoned knife and a pot, which were now 2 additional tools for his survival arsenal. Finally, Andrew was experiencing some strokes of luck after suffering so many blows over the previous days. But despite this luck, Andrew was still in deep trouble. He decided to stay put in this spot near the berries for 2 days. He rested and tried to let his wounds heal, although the longer he went without proper food, the less effective his body was at doing this. On the morning of day 4, Andrew saw a helicopter fly by above, slowly covering the land across the river from him. He waited an astonishing 9 hours from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., hoping that this helicopter would come to his rescue. But unfortunately, once the helicopter had cleared its section of land, it immediately flew away. The helicopter had not been assigned to look at the river, and so rather than spotting Andrew and then trying to land or even dropping down a rescue worker, the helicopter just zoomed off without stopping or giving any indication that it had seen him. Andrew thought to himself, quote, "That was your only way out." At this point, he was really starting to run out of hope. After Andrew had gone missing, a record-breaking heat wave swept over the Pacific Northwest, further adding to his sense of hopelessness. He was already very limited in his mobility, and now if he strayed too far from the river, he would surely suffer a quick death. By day 4 of his ordeal, Andrew's mind had completely lost the ability to keep track of years and months. He was unable to think beyond the present moment and the immediate future. He was totally fixated on his short-term survival. He was also fighting a fierce mental battle, struggling between accepting his inevitable death or continuing to fight for his survival. Andrew's mental health had suffered in years prior, and at points in his life he had even contemplated suicide. And yet, despite this, here he was in a situation where it would have been easy, even understandable perhaps, to give up, and yet he continued to fight for his life. Andrew's mind went back and forth in this battle, taking wide swings in either direction, and at one point he had basically accepted death, to the point where he only pressed on in order to make the rescue workers' jobs a bit easier. Andrew had brought along a notebook for what was supposed to be his short hike, and now that he had some time on his hands, he sat down and began to write. He started by writing out his will and some of the other dark thoughts that were going through his head. But then he changed course, and he decided to write down wedding vows to his then girlfriend. This was an expression of hope for Andrew, and it gave him something to keep fighting for. And so he fought on, and he fought on hard, by the way. As the days went by, Andrew was becoming so exhausted and depleted that he was basically just staggering forward for as long as he could before he would collapse, sleep for a little bit, and then struggle back to his feet to repeat the process. He did this for several days, but then on day 8 of his ordeal, something absolutely incredible happened. Maybe it was due to Andrew's perseverance, maybe it was just dumb luck, or maybe it was a combination of both. Either way, during the afternoon of day 8, Andrew just randomly stumbled back onto the Pratt River Trail. He recognized the trail due to his memory of the way the acorns were scattered on the forest floor, indicating a path to follow. This was the very same path that he had formerly lost. When Andrew realized that he had made it back onto the trail that would lead him to safety, he began screaming triumphantly at the top of his lungs. He had somehow, against all odds, won. That's how he viewed it. He wasn't exactly out of the woods yet, but for the first time since he had gotten lost, his chances of survival were actually looking pretty damn good. He began hiking back in the direction of the trailhead, but he was still moving slow. The sun eventually began to set, and so rather than risk further injury or death, Andrew settled down right on the side of the trail for one more night. If they won't help me, I'll put myself right in front of their face. This is what Andrew thought as he curled up confidently on the trail, knowing that he was close to the trailhead and close to his car. And then, the next morning, he was woken up around 7 a.m. by the first hikers on trail that day. They were actually trail runners, and these two runners marked the beginning of the end of Andrew's nightmare ordeal. They gave him some food, and then they turned around to go summon help. Within a few hours, Andrew was being helped out of the woods and brought to the hospital. By some miracle, Andrew not only survived, but he actually escaped with pretty minimal injuries. Sure, he was scraped up and malnourished, but these were things that he would quickly recover from. In fact, the doctors that treated him were very surprised that he was doing so well physically. And while this physical aspect is important, obviously, the mental aspect is important as well. Fortunately, it seems as though Andrew is doing better these days, certainly better than he was when he was lost in the woods, but even to this day, he's still quite shaken from this experience. I actually had the pleasure of working with him and talking with him in order to put this video together, and so I can definitely see the emotional impact that this ordeal has had on him. And speaking of working with Andrew, he made it very clear to me, and also in many interviews that he did after this happened, that he regrets a lot of the decisions that he made on that hike. I think we can all agree that he definitely made some mistakes that nearly cost him his life. We can acknowledge that and we can learn from it because it is the truth. But I also think that we should show Andrew some grace. We've all made mistakes after all. Those of you that watched my last video and watch this channel regularly certainly know that I myself made plenty of these mistakes in my younger hiking days, and the fact that Andrew is willing to admit these mistakes and take accountability for them says a lot about his character. It also says a lot that he was even willing to let me cover this story in the first place so that thousands of people can learn from the mistakes that he made. And so with all that in mind, I will say he made it clear to me that he has no problem taking the heat from people in the comments and stuff, but I don't know, please keep these things in mind before you just run off to start ripping on him in the comments section. He's owned his mistakes. I think that's the most that you can do in a situation like this, and I also guarantee that there's nothing you can write that he hasn't heard before. So rather than criticizing him in the comments, I urge you to wish him well. I've decided that I want to start using this channel and my platform to recognize and fundraise for the unsung heroes in almost all of the stories that I cover. That would be the volunteer search and rescue members. I'm not sure if any volunteer search and rescue organizations helped look for Andrew. He wasn't really sure, but I don't know. I still wanted to call out one that is local to the area where this story took place. And so with that said, I've made a donation to the King County Explorer Search and Rescue Group, and I'll have a link in the description to their website, and I highly encourage all of you to do the same. I'm not affiliated with them. They don't have any clue I'm making this video or that I'm gonna talk about them. I just think it'd be good to give back a little bit, and this is something I'm trying to do in all my videos going forward. I asked Andrew if he had any message that he wanted to pass along to my audience, and this is what he wrote to me. Quote, "I wish to let the viewers know that it's genuinely fine to make mistakes, and eventually you find your way back again. Laughing is a beautiful jumpstart for your meat suit when all else fails. If life has you lying on the ground, staring up at the stars of your mistakes, it's okay to joke about how glorious it was to be here in the first place. Keep your chin up, buttercups, and stay spicy." If you want to follow Andrew, I encourage you to check out his Twitch, which is right here on the screen, or you can find it in the description, and you'll find his, quote, more carefully constructed thoughts at his YouTube channel, which I'll also have a link to in the description. The last part of what Andrew wanted to include in the video was, quote, "Thank you for hearing my message, and I wish for you to enjoy the rest of your existence aboard our oblong space rock," which I probably didn't say that right. I don't know, dude. I'm so glad that Andrew made a full recovery, and my heart goes out to him. And thank you all so much for watching this video. This channel's been growing so much, and I'm just so grateful for all of you. I'll see you next week.